Imagine walking through a quiet medieval city today, stone streets, old churches, tourists taking photos. And now imagine this, right under your feet. Something is buried that was never meant to be found, and once you hear this, you'll never look at old cities the same way again, because historians thought medieval cities were simple, dirty, and empty beneath the surface. But then workers started digging, and what they uncovered changed history forever. And here's the part no one tells you in school: under cities like London, Paris, Rome, Prague, and York, they didn't just find old pipes or broken walls. They found entire hidden worlds, sealed away like secrets. And the first shock came when builders in London broke through the ground and suddenly fell into rooms that still had doors, stairs, and furniture, frozen in time, as if people had just walked away. And the question immediately hit historians like a punch: why was an entire city buried instead of rebuilt? And before they could answer that, another layer appeared below it, and then another, because medieval cities were not built once. They were built again and again on top of themselves, stacking centuries like a dark sandwich of disaster. And the deeper archaeologists went, the stranger it got, because beneath marketplaces they found mass graves, bodies piled, without coffins, without names, victims of plagues so deadly people didn't even have time to pray. And suddenly the romantic image of medieval life shattered. Because these weren't peaceful burials, these were panic burials, fast, silent, desperate. And then came the whispers: what were they trying to hide? And in Paris, under the streets, they uncovered the catacombs, walls made entirely of skulls. Not symbolic, not artistic, but practical. Because the dead were overflowing and the living were terrified. And then another twist: beneath medieval churches, they found pagan temples, smashed statues, burned altars, proving that Christianity didn't just replace old beliefs, it buried them, literally. And this wasn't accidental, it was intentional, power written in stone and soil. And just when historians thought that was the darkest truth, they found something colder: sealed tunnels, leading nowhere on maps, tunnels wide enough for crowds, suggesting escape routes, secret rituals, or mass movement during emergencies. And no records explained them, which raises a disturbing question: what emergency was so terrifying it needed hidden underground roads? And then came the discovery under castles, where instead of treasure, they found prison cells. No light, no ventilation, claw marks still etched into the walls, marks made by people who knew they would never come out. And above these prisons, kings once slept peacefully, and that realization changed everything. Because medieval power wasn't just shown with crowns and thrones, it was enforced below ground, out of sight. And then the story twisted again when archaeologists uncovered entire buried streets, complete with shops, taverns, children's toys, proving these places weren't ruins from war, but victims of something faster: fires so hot cities collapsed into themselves, floods so powerful streets turned into graves. And instead of clearing the destruction, survivors simply built over the dead, because memory was too painful. And then came the bones of animals. Exotic animals, lions, bears, monkeys, buried beneath arenas. Proof that medieval cities held brutal entertainments they later pretended never existed. And here's where it gets chilling: under some cities, they found layers with no signs of violence at all. No fire, no weapons, no collapse, just sudden abandonment, which means people didn't die there. They left, all at once, and no one knows why. And then in Italy, under medieval towns, they found Roman cities, and under those, even older civilizations, meaning medieval people were living on top of ancient knowledge they didn't understand, recycling stones from forgotten empires, unknowingly erasing the past to survive the present. And then came the most unsettling discovery of all: warning symbols, scratched into underground walls, symbols meaning plague, curse, or forbidden, placed not to keep people out, but to remind survivors never to dig there again. And that explains why some areas stayed untouched for centuries, because fear was stronger than curiosity. And as the story reaches its final turn, historians realize something uncomfortable: the reason so much was buried under medieval cities wasn't just disaster, or ignorance, or lack of technology, it was choice. Because digging up the past meant reopening trauma, questioning power, and facing truths that could destroy the story rulers wanted people to believe. So they covered it, paved over it, and told a cleaner version of history. And the final reveal is this: medieval cities are not built on land. They are built on silence, layer after layer of forgotten suffering, hidden belief, erased lives. And the next time you walk through an old city and hear your footsteps echo on stone, remember this: beneath you are streets where people laughed, prayed, screamed, and vanished. And history didn't lose them, it buried them on purpose. And just when you think the story under medieval cities cannot get darker, it does, because once archaeologists realized these buried layers weren't accidents, they started asking the forbidden question: who decided what stays buried and what gets remembered? And that's when records began to feel suspiciously quiet, because city chronicles spoke proudly of kings, cathedrals, and victories, but said almost nothing about what lay beneath. And when silence appears in history, it's usually hiding something, and in city after city, dig after dig, the same pattern emerged. Because under wealthy districts they found solid foundations, clean stone, careful rebuilding, but under poor quarters they found collapsed homes, crushed bodies, and no effort to recover them. As if some lives simply didn't matter enough to save. And this wasn't random, it was social hierarchy frozen underground. And then came the discovery that shocked even hardened researchers: buried hospitals, not places of healing, but places of containment, where the sick were taken and sealed away, doors locked, walls thick, no exits. Because medieval medicine couldn't cure plague, leprosy, or madness, so cities chose the easier solution: hide the problem. And beneath streets still used today, they found beds with iron restraints, proving patients didn't always agree to stay. And that leads to a terrifying realization: how many people disappeared underground without a single record. And then, beneath marketplaces, archaeologists uncovered strange pits filled with everyday objects: shoes, cups, coins, toys, all intentionally smashed before burial. And at first no one understood why, until historians connected it to fear rituals, because medieval people believed objects could carry curses, sickness, or evil spirits. So when disaster struck, they didn't just bury bodies, they buried everything associated with the event, erasing it from memory, hoping reality itself would forget. And then came the churches again, because under altars they found bones arranged in symbols, not Christian symbols, but older ones. Meaning some churches secretly absorbed pagan practices, instead of destroying them, hiding forbidden rituals beneath holy ground. And suddenly religion looked less pure and more like survival through compromise. And here's where the tension tightens under some cities. Archaeologists found fresh air shafts, still functional after centuries, meaning someone expected people to remain underground for long periods. Not hours, not days, but months. Which raises the chilling possibility that medieval cities prepared for something they believed would wipe out the surface entirely. And no text explains what that threat was. And then the emotional beat hits hard, because beneath schools and homes they found children's skeletons, not in graves, but in workspaces, showing kids worked underground, in tunnels, cellars and mines, breathing toxic air, invisible to the city above. And suddenly medieval childhood stops looking innocent and starts looking exploited. And then comes another twist: under city walls they found fake foundations, walls built to look strong above ground but hollow beneath, allowing rulers to secretly collapse sections during rebellions, trapping enemies underground, a medieval kill switch built into the city itself. And this changes how we understand sieges, because the city wasn't just defended from the outside, it was weaponized from within. And then, deep below administrative buildings, they found rooms with nothing but benches and chains, no decoration, no symbols, places designed not for justice, but for fear, where interrogations happened far from public eyes. Proving medieval law wasn't about fairness, it was about control. And the deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became: everything dirty, painful, or morally questionable was pushed downward, out of sight, until the surface could pretend to be clean. And that brings us to one of the most disturbing discoveries of all: sealed rooms with no doors. Rooms that were built and then closed forever, sometimes with human remains inside, meaning someone was intentionally entombed while still alive, not as punishment alone, but as an example, a warning to anyone who might challenge power. And here's the twist that keeps historians awake at night. Many of these buried horrors align with moments of political change: new kings, new laws, new religions, suggesting that every time society tried to reinvent itself, it buried the old world beneath it, literally and psychologically. And by now, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: medieval cities didn't just grow upward, they grew downward, feeding on their own past. And the emotional weight of that realization hits hard, because it means progress was built on forgetting, and forgetting was enforced. And as part 2 closes, the biggest question remains unanswered, echoing louder than ever: if so much was buried on purpose, what is still buried today? Waiting. And now comes the part that historians rarely say out loud, because once you understand what was buried under medieval cities, you start realizing that these cities weren't just places to live, they were machines designed to control memory. And the deeper archaeologists went, the more obvious it became that underground spaces followed patterns, not chaos, because torture chambers, plague rooms, forbidden shrines, sealed tunnels, and mass graves weren't scattered randomly. They were placed deliberately beneath centers of power: palaces, cathedrals, courts, guild halls, as if the city itself was layered like a lie: beauty on top, brutality below. And once that pattern emerged, researchers started re-examining old city maps, only to notice something chilling. Entire underground zones were missing, erased from records. And when they excavated those blank areas, they found evidence of organized systems: ventilation, water flow, food storage, proving that medieval cities were capable of sustaining large populations underground, which destroys the idea that medieval people were ignorant or unplanned, because you don't build something like that unless you expect to use it. And this leads to a terrifying possibility. What were they preparing for? And then came discoveries beneath city halls, where they found sealed archives, not burned, not destroyed, just locked away, containing censored trials, forbidden testimonies, and confessions extracted under torture, revealing that entire events were officially erased, rewritten above ground while the truth was entombed below. And suddenly medieval history starts to feel less like a record, and more like a carefully edited story. And here's the emotional twist beneath monasteries. They found private cells, with carved prayers repeating the same sentence again and again, showing monks imprisoned not for crimes, but for doubts, questions, or visions that challenged doctrine, meaning faith itself had an underground prison. And then archaeologists found something that broke even seasoned experts' messages scratched into stone, written by prisoners, plague victims, workers, children, messages saying things like, "We were left here. They sealed us in. Do not trust the city." Words never meant for us, but somehow surviving centuries. And at that moment, the buried city stops feeling ancient and starts feeling personal, because these weren't symbols, they were voices. And then came the discovery under trade centers, hidden counting rooms where coins were clipped, weights altered, and fraud carefully concealed, proving medieval economies were manipulated from below while honesty was preached above. And this explains why sudden economic collapses appear in history with no clear cause, because the evidence was buried before anyone could question it. And then came another unsettling layer under hospitals and churches. They found ritual deposits combining medicine, religion, and magic, showing that medieval society officially condemned superstition while secretly relying on it, creating a double reality where public belief and private fear lived in different layers of the same city. And the deeper they went, the more one truth became unavoidable: the underground depths where medieval society told the truth, and the surface was where it performed. And this is where the final reveal begins to take shape, because once historians connected disasters, plagues, rebellions, religious shifts, and political purges to underground expansions, they realized something chilling. Every major medieval crisis triggered a new burial, not just of bodies, but of ideas, systems, and people who didn't fit the new order. And that means medieval cities weren't just surviving chaos, they were digesting it, swallowing problems whole and paving over them until silence returned. And here's the moment that changes how you see modern cities. Too many medieval underground structures are still there, still sealed, not because we forgot them, but because authorities chose not to open them, fearing what reopening them would symbolize. Because digging isn't just archaeology, it's accusation. And when you finally step back and look at the full picture, the powerful payoff hits hard. The reason medieval cities feel heavy, mysterious, and haunting isn't imagination. It's memory trapped in stone, because these cities were built to look stable while hiding instability beneath. And that design never really ended. It just evolved. And the final truth is this: what they buried under medieval cities wasn't just the dead, it was responsibility. And the moment you understand that, you realize history didn't forget these people. It chose to walk over them. And the next time you stand in an old city square, surrounded by beauty, remember this unsettling thought: the ground beneath you is not solid earth. It is layers of silence, fear, control, and forgotten lives, holding the city up. And as long as it stays buried, the story above can pretend it was always clean, for someone brave enough to dig again.